And I was wondering if you could expound a little bit about some of the things that you notice as a race activist and a vegan activist, and how that was affecting you and your personality, your friends,
Mhm.
and what were some of the things going on a psychological and emotional level for you personally?
Sure. Oh my gosh, there's so much I could say about that. There's a lot of like, what's the word? Intersectionality between like the veganism stuff and the anti-racism stuff. I remember like, because I mean, even within each subgroup, like even within veganism, you come across people who there's a lot of infighting within the vegan community, and a lot of it is based on racism. It's kind of funny when you
Wow.
zoom out of it, but yeah, I mean, I noticed that, a lot of people in the vegan movement, they would compare animal agriculture to like slavery. And then I noticed that like, that comparison within the vegan movement, you had people who were, you had Black people getting offended about that comparison. And then you also had people who were like, it's like, it all gets to be such a mess because everyone is fighting over what is the most politically correct way to deliver the message. And, there's just a lot of weird layers in those movements. But anyway, to get back to your question though, basically when you are a vegan or when you are a social justice warrior, you learn to put people in categories based on their race and based on, their job or their behavior or where they're from, their gender, you learn to put people in boxes. And when someone challenges the category that they're in, it becomes kind of like, I really don't know how to, I need to figure out how to explain this better, but it's almost like, when you see people who are not white, for instance, you immediately start to assign all of these characteristics to them, like, oh, they must have had a hard life, or like, oh, they're oppressed in America, or like, oh, it's very hard to like pick up new nuances in people's personalities when you are so used to like categorizing everyone. And depending on who you are, you're going to start to change your thoughts to fit the box that you're supposed to be in, So for instance, like I remember in those movements, you had a lot of white people who dealt guilt for being white. You had people who were, they saw themselves as white men, and the box that they have white men in is like oppressor, victimizer, colonizer, like the person who's causing so much harm to everyone. And so like for the white men in those movements, they see themselves through that lens, and then they can't think of themselves in any other way than like, oh my gosh, like I'm the reason why all these people are suffering, and I need to apologize for being white. So it turns into this like massive brainwashing operation where everyone they can't see past the box that they put themselves and other people in. And so for me, because I'm Indian and a woman, I kept on finding situations. I tried to see racism in places where there wasn't any at all. I would get very offended over nothing because I could not see out of my box that I had put myself in. And it's a very gradual thing. Like it happens so slowly that you don't even realize that you're seeing life through this way. But, after a certain point, you just realize that you feel so heavy all the time. You feel so angry all the time. You feel so offended all the time. And I think at that point, people either snap out of it just because they physically can't handle seeing life through that worldview anymore, or they get deeper into it and it has a lot of bad consequences to go even deeper into it,
You had mentioned intersectionality, which is a term that was foreign to my generation when I was in university, and all stemmed from a paper by Kimberly Crenshaw on mapping the margins, where she analyzed the difference in the judicial punishment between African Americans and white people, and especially as it pertained to domestic abuse. And she had an interesting paper. It was definitely thought provocative. However, that has like stemmed into some whole different animal that has infiltrated all sorts of universities in just one generation. And now intersectionality is a buzz term, and like your intersectionality is a BIPOC female, and you've been oppressed by this system. And I was wondering, can you tell our audience how you feel oppressed by the system as a BIPOC female?
Well, I don't feel oppressed at all anymore at all. But at a certain point in my life, I definitely felt like every problem I had in my life was because of the system and not anything to do with my personal decisions or like my personal flaws and mistakes that I've made. And so, I think so much of getting out of that mindset is just taking accountability for your life and taking more responsibility over your own choices. And so, at this point, I don't see myself as oppressed at all. I see myself as actually extremely privileged and very blessed to be in the situation I'm in, to come from the circumstances I come from. To be in America is just such a blessing. I think that there's a lot of it's weird because, you can have any experience of life that you want, really. Like, that's something that I learned through the whole social justice warrior mindset phase in my life, was that your beliefs about the world and your beliefs about yourself really shape the experiences that you have, and it shapes the way that you move through life and the way that you communicate with people. And so to break out of that mindset, it changes every part of your life. It changes the way you see people. It helps you to not internalize everything so much and to just kind of see the lightheartedness of life again. I think that a lot of the social justice warrior mindset is like, you almost kind of feel this inherent resentment towards life itself, whereas now I feel very grateful for life. So it's kind of just like, yeah, I don't really see myself as oppressed anymore.
Yeah. So in that process, undoubtedly you had like-minded friends, like-minded views, worldview, and there's definitely probably some kind of sociological friendship, a commonality that you're in this together, and you kind of I'm just thinking group dynamics. I've never been in the social justice movement directly as an advocate, but I was wondering, what kind of sociological pressures do you feel with other like-minded social justice warriors, pressures of conformity or speech or things like that I've heard is pretty prevalent in these different circles?
That's such a good question. That's such a funny question because I feel like that I can already think back on so many times where people would be so afraid to say something because they would because it's being in that mindset, you're so worried about offending people, and it really makes it hard to express yourself in a lighthearted way. It's like you're overanalyzing everything you say around those people. I even remember, being at a festival, an outdoor food festival one day. And in our group of friends, there was a guy, and he went to go buy a shirt at this other food stand. And the shirt had said, "Kings recognize queens." And he bought the shirt, and then he came back and he showed the shirt to us. And there were two girls in the friend group, and they were like, "That's such a sexist shirt." Queens don't need kings to recognize them. It's just it's so funny thinking back on it. But so he went and returned the shirt. So I feel like there's so much pressure when you're in friendships like that to always say the right thing, to always do the right thing, to never offend anybody, that everyone is walking on eggshells all the time. And oh my gosh, it's so uncomfortable. You feel like you really can't be free in yourself, in how you act. It's every single thing you say has to I know it's not true for everyone, but the groups that I was part of and what I saw around me was that everyone had a guilty conscience all the time, and they would constantly be trying to appease each other, and you could never call anyone out for, if you do call someone out, you have to basically, it's for you to call someone out on their bad behavior, they have to be doing something that you think is offensive to oppressed groups. But it's so hard to it's so hard to even describe it. It's a very uncomfortable and awkward energy.
It seems like the joy in your own individual life kind of disappears because of the group think, or the group pressure to not offend anybody, and you almost take on a persona that isn't even authentic. I've heard it said, "Oh, I've got to be my authentic self," but it seems like in some ways people begin to put on masks of inauthenticity. Did you have any pressures or experience that or observe that in your own experience?
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely. I definitely felt it in myself, and I saw it in everyone else too. You're right. You really can't be authentic. You can't be, it's like you can't have your own thoughts. Like you have to have the correct emotions, you have to have the correct feelings about something. Like you can't have your own personal experience of life, and you can't talk about your own personal experience of life if it doesn't fit the boxes that you're supposed to be in. So, like if someone, like when I was in that very oppressed mindset, if I were to see someone who was Black and say that they did not feel oppressed in America, like rather than be curious about their opinions and their mindset and like get to know them on a personal level, it's like it has to run through my filter of like, oh, that doesn't compute with like the box they're supposed to be in, so get angry at them or just like call them names or reject them. It's very like, it trains everyone to just constantly have this like program running in their mind that like, yeah, you can't have, and you start judging your own thoughts all the time. Like, I mean, it just reminds me of everything we experienced with the COVID stuff over the last couple years, and how like if you say one thing against the mainstream narrative, you are completely demonized. And I feel like that's what the social justice warrior movement really strives to do. It kind of strives to create robots out of people, to get everyone to think the same, to have the same opinions, to have the same expectations of other people, to like just to be the same. And when you're doing that, you're basically conditioning yourself out of your own personality. You're conditioning yourself out of your own God-given spirit. It kind of removes your spirit in a lot of ways, and you're no longer an original free-thinking person. You're very much on a conveyor belt of like, yeah.